Although the system of public monitoring of elections originated in other countries, this practice was adopted almost across the entire world and has successfully caught on in our country. Local organizations, along with state bodies, conduct their own monitoring of electoral process and, what is even more important, control counting of ballots. While this activity does not provide absolute guarantee of objective results, it does considerably reduce possibility of various manipulations. Public control organizations such as Civil Control Association for Protection of Electoral Rights, Russian Public Institute of Suffrage, Russian Foundation for Free Elections have been successfully operating in our country for a long period of time. They control one of the most important public processes, elections of public officials at all levels, who are responsible for welfare of the whole country and its citizens. One of the institutions of public control is the Civil Control Association of Nonprofit Organizations for Protection of Electoral Rights. It was established in 2007 and includes more than 40 Russian NGOs. Regional offices of the association operate in 50 regions of the country. The list of heads of the Civil Control Association includes members of the public chamber, authoritative scholars in the field of electoral law, representatives of non-governmental organizations specializing in election monitoring. Information about the association's activities is posted at the association website and at the People's Choice Information Portal. Experts believe that this portal is one of the most comprehensive online resources dedicated to elections. Members of the Civil Control Association take part in elections monitoring at various levels, federal, regional, and local, both in Russia and abroad. The SMS portal, Code of Truth, created for receiving complaints on electoral violations, and the telephone hotline help the association to receive feedback from voters. Missions of international observers are of paramount importance for public control. International monitoring in general is a very necessary and important component of electoral control. It is no secret that representatives of various parties who attend polling stations may be politically committed due to their party affiliation and therefore may be biased. This may affect their conclusions and lead to different political speculations. International experts, on the contrary, have no personal interest in outcome of elections, so when they observe compliance with electoral laws and observe the process of elections, they are able to form objective judgment and to present it in their reports upon the results of their missions. International activities of the Civil Control Association are carried out by the Regional Public Organization for Democracy and Human Rights. The leaders of this Regional Public Organization for Democracy and Human Rights participate in annual review conferences of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. These conferences are dedicated to fulfilling the OSCE member states' international obligations in humanitarian field and other international spheres related to electoral rights protection. The association cooperates with various authoritative foreign non-governmental organizations such as the European Center of Geopolitical Analysis, European Center for Development of Democracy, International Expert Center for Electoral Systems, and others. The delegates of the Civil Control Association took part in monitoring electoral campaigns in foreign countries. Members of the European Parliament, members of different national parliaments, and leading experts in law of public election suffrage took part in monitoring of elections in Russia at all levels. They were invited by the Organization for Democracy and Human Rights. International and non-governmental organizations send their observers who are ready to share their methods of observation, criteria for fairness of elections. Although these experts may have different approaches and personal political beliefs, they all remain unbiased. They don't interfere with the election process. They always act as professionals in their field. Respecting Russian culture and history, they don't try to pre-declare the elections to be unfair, non-transparent, etc. Their task is to use their expertise and to notice faults in operation of polling stations or in the procedure of ballot counting. Here are some comments by international experts on the parliamentary election campaign in 2011. Is this the first time you are observing elections in Russia? No, these are the second parliamentary elections, and in fact, this is the seventh or eighth time in general, because I have already been an observer at regional elections. What is your impression about this election campaign? Our mission of observers is a short-term mission. But obviously, we are closely cooperating with Russian non-governmental analytical structures, which report us about the campaign swing. We will be assessing the election campaign only after the end of voting. We had certain remarks with regard to the elections, but we will comment on them later. As far as the single voting day is concerned, I want to emphasize that generally all election commissions are prepared for the voting and act quite professionally. Have you recorded any violations? We have recorded some minor violations which are not serious enough to affect the general results of elections. For example, members of some election commissions are insufficiently familiar with details of the electoral legislation. We've noticed insufficiently comfortable conditions in the premises of some polling stations. Judging by the questionnaires which we have received from our international observers who work in different regions, we can conclude that election authorities of the Russian Federation have very high level of qualification and are well prepared.
В общем, по итогам этих анкет, которые мы уже получили от наших наблюдателей, международных наблюдателей, работающих в разных регионах, мы оцениваем очень высокий уровень подготовки и профессионализма избирательных органов Российской Федерации.
That was the first time I've been observing the elections in Russia. The experience is positive. I liked that everyone worked at a high level to make everything today to run smooth. Today I had the chance to visit 3 voting stations, one of them in Moscow and the other 2 in the Moscow region. I came to the first voting station even before its opening, and we were able to see empty ballot boxes and the voting station's opening process. We watched as citizens came to vote, and I loved the positive mood of these people. They treated the elections as a holiday. There was a music sounding around. I spoke with representatives of various political parties and organizations and have not heard anything negative about the election. Have you recorded any violations? At those voting stations that I visited, I didn't see and I didn't hear of any violations. My experience was only positive. Frankly speaking, I was even surprised in a positive sense that the organization was very good. I wish to congratulate the Russians that, till now, their elections are at such a high level. I've been observing Russian elections since 2003. I participated in former missions of the Council of Europe, and this year I have for the first time come as an independent observer, and I can compare my experience with previous times. What are your impressions of the election campaign? I cannot give any evaluations of the election campaign since I came only on Friday, when the campaign has almost finished. I can only make guesses about the campaign because the Czech media simply doesn't give any objective assessments. In order to have a definite judgment, I obviously would have to observe the campaign for a long time. Have you recorded any violations? Speaking of my personal experience, there were no violations at all the voting stations which I attended. The only thing I can mention is that in the morning the turnout was rather low, but I think now it might be slightly higher. In general, everything is going well. People keep coming, voting, filling in voting bulletins, put them into ballot boxes. Everything is going as it should be. What are your impressions of the election campaign? I think everything is going a little too calm. I'm afraid the voting turnout is yet too low, although this might be because we were inspecting constituencies in the morning. In general, I think that everything is well organized. The only remark is that there are no curtains at some voting stations. An open desk is installed. A grandma sits at the desk and fills in her voting ballot in public. You can see what she's doing. But in general, there are no problems and complaints. I've been observing the elections since perestroika times, so I have a 30-year experience. Could you please evaluate these elections? As I have already told, I didn't see any significant violations. Everything was good. I think there even are some technical improvements. I have seen 3 polling stations, all in Moscow, so my point of view is limited. I have only one political remark. I believe that 7% barrier is too high.
Let's take the Yabloko party as an example. In Moscow and St. Petersburg, Yabloko gained more than 7% of votes.
That means middle class is voting for this party in the largest cities of Russia. And thus, this party must be presented in the parliament. I also think that the decision to reduce the barrier to 5% was a good decision. It should have been made a long time ago. Do you think this election campaign is transparent? I wouldn't call these elections transparent. I don't want to lecture anybody, but distinct dominant position of United Russia, its penetration in mass media is apparent. In the West, there is the same kind of inequality. For example, President Obama was elected because he was getting funding from large financial companies. In America, money grants privileged positions in a very similar way. The same happens in Italy. Perhaps the situation is a little better in Germany, but we have to face it. I'm trying to judge objectively. The electoral system needs to be improved. All political parties must have the same real access to mass media and be able to get funding during the electoral campaign too. Small parties should be entitled to receive public funding so that their ideas are communicated to the public. I think it is a fundamental right to protect minorities. This does not jeopardize the majority. On the contrary, I believe that authorities, unable to listen to different opinions, are in a weaker position. The nature of my work is that usually I deal with organization of elections, not with their evaluation. Usually, the ratio of positive and critical feedback is 4-1. Still, you have to give a clear idea of what you are really going to do in the next 4 years. As for the present Russian campaign, in my opinion, it has been too emotional, and criticism has prevailed. There has been more mud throwing than discussing particular political programs and actions. So, for me, it all looked a bit strange. Do you think this electoral campaign is transparent? This morning, I heard a comment that due to the huge number of observers, these elections have been the most transparent for the last years. I agree with this opinion. I think it is true. Regional Public Organization for Democracy and Human Rights, which is a member of the Civil Control Association, has a wide geography of cooperation. The organization is successfully cooperating with the U.S., Israel, Italy, France, Germany, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Slovakia, Estonia, and Latvia. The experts it invites monitor the most significant elections of our country. Their missions are usually short, but very intensive. Visits of foreign observers to our country in no way can be called easy and pleasant vacation. Their schedule is very tense throughout the entire mission. An election day starts early. Mobile teams leave the assembly point and go to Moscow polling stations. But experts monitor elections not only in the capital of Russia. Their representatives visit small towns and villages across the entire country, which makes the picture of elections more unbiased. The streets of Moscow are yet empty. At this early hour, there is almost no traffic. It allows experts to combine inspection of polling stations with a brief tour around Moscow. Driving past the Kremlin, no one asks what it is. Everybody knows the symbol of the Russian state. The accompanying interpreter speaks about other Moscow sites, and everyone is willing to find out new information. This is perhaps the only entertaining episode of the visit, after which the official part of the mission starts. The experts go to polling stations, which in fact are the prime objects of their interest. Arrival of foreign observers to the first facility doesn't cause neither fuss nor frustration. The group enters the polling station in accordance with security rules. After their arrival, the observers have time to take a closer look at the process, check whether everything is done to eliminate possible violations. They want to know every aspect of the process, where visual agitation is located, what information is available to voters at the polling station, where people will fill in their ballots, where the ballot boxes are located. The voters themselves are definitely of extreme interest for the observers. They have an opportunity to talk to members of the Election Commission to view the documents they are interested in. Everything goes without any pressure. People who technically support polling stations are a little bit worried when they communicate with foreigners, but this is a part of our national character. This polling station is not the only one on the observers list, and the group leaves to the next address. The election day turned out to be windy, cold, and dank. At the next polling station, the observers had to wait for some time outside in the cold wind. At this hour, Moscow is already awakened, and the voting station is crowded, so the observers have a lot of material for studying. The observers have a chance to talk to national observers from different political parties and to voters themselves. All these contacts and conversations help them to get a full-scale understanding of the electoral process and to make their own judgments. Right after the end of inspection of all voting stations, mobile teams return to the information center at the Chamber of Trade and Commerce. Elections are monitored continuously. This allows foreign observers to stay at the center of events, to have a keen sense of the pulse of elections. The observers receive feedback from the telephone hotline and from their colleagues. For example, from Anna Marie Lezin, who went to the region of Tver to monitor elections on the ground. Voters from the region of Tver would have been very surprised if they knew that this benevolent lady, carefully monitoring these elections, is the honorary speaker of the Belgian state. Mrs. Lezin visited 5 polling stations. Her visit to one of these stations was an absolute surprise for everyone. After finishing her trip, Mrs. Lezin had a meeting with the governor of the region of Tver. During the conversation with the governor, she mentioned that she hadn't found any serious violations, even at the polling station which she had selected herself without any preliminary notification. She got absolutely convinced that there were no special arrangements made for her. She spent the day among ordinary Russian people. She had a chance to look into the eyes of the voters, whose rights are insistently protected by the experts. She could share her own observations with the colleagues after coming back. At the information center, she took part in a briefing, which gave observers the floor to tell what they had seen and to express their conclusions. Notably, the work of the foreign observers was widely covered by both central TV channels and printed media. So instead of having some rest, the observers gave interviews to various journalists. Is this the first time you are observing Russian elections? No, in fact, this is my second time. The first time I observed elections in 1996. It was a long time ago, and now I can see numerous changes. My first impression is that these elections are more democratic, less dramatic, more quiet, and more progressive than in many countries of Western Europe. Yesterday, we were at a voting station where lots of young people controlled elections as public observers. We also visited some polling stations in Vidnoye city in the Moscow region. We saw that the entire venue is covered by webcams and that these cameras allow every citizen of Russia to keep real control over elections. I like this idea. Do you think that large investments of our country into implementation of this new technology have been well spent? You know, democracy is an expensive thing. This is my first experience, and I am very impressed with what I have seen. Is there a big difference between your literature, cinema, TV, and media-based vision of Russia and your personal impression? Definitely, the difference is huge. I love Russia. I am an Orthodox Christian, and I am a lawyer. I am very pleased to see Russian progress in the field of the electoral legislation and elections. Yesterday, during the roundtable discussion, I stated that elections in Russia fully comply with European and international standards. The fact that webcams are set across the entire country guarantees that elections will be transparent and fair and that control will be strict. Why did you decide to change your business agenda and to spend your time observing these elections? I am a lawyer. it was very important for me to gain my personal experience in Russia. That is why I wanted to see democratic changes in Russia firsthand.
Набраться опыта в России, увидеть своими глазами. И поэтому я хотел бы посмотреть, как происходят эти изменения.
Elections are an important element of democracy in general and of human rights protection.
Выборы очень важны для демократии в целом и для защиты прав человека в частности.
Have you seen that elections are transparent and legitimate? How will you comment on this event in your country? I have already said that I am a lawyer. Therefore, my opinion is based on my own expertise. I am an independent person, and I will be definitely speaking of what I've seen here in my country.
Я, как уже сказал, являюсь юристом, поэтому моя точка зрения основывается на моем непосредственном опыте. Я являюсь человеком независимым, и то, что я увидел здесь, я обязательно расскажу об этом у себя на родине. В частности, я бы предложил у нас в Сербии перенять тот позитивный опыт в плане технических средств, которые я здесь наблюдал в России.
Is this the first time you observe elections in Russia? Yes, this is my first time. Why did you decide to postpone your business and to come to Russia as an observer at elections? Because I believe Russia is the biggest friend of the Serbian people. Do your personal political beliefs prevent you from being an unbiased observer at these elections? We came here not to express our political position, but to see whether these elections are democratic. In our country, we heard lots of statements that people in Russia think the previous elections to the State Duma were not completely transparent and fair. However, we have monitored these elections personally, and now I am sure Russia is the most democratic country in the world. Did you face any opposition in getting information you needed? To the contrary, we have been very welcome. We have received comprehensive answers to all our questions, and none of our questions has caused any negative reactions. Natasha, a woman is able to notice any elements of disorder. What do you think about the atmosphere at the voting stations you have visited? I want to stress that my female eyes fail to notice any faults, despite all my attempts. In your opinion, does the election process need to be automated to exclude the human factor in counting of ballots? Should we rely on electronic equipment? Despite the fact that we live in the 21st century, neither electronic equipment nor modern technology is able to replace a human being. Why did you decide to change your agenda and to come to Russia to observe these elections? I love Russia, and I believe that Russian and Italian cultures are very similar. In particular, I love Russian literature. My understanding of this fact became even stronger after I have read Solzhenitsyn and Bulgakov. 2011 was the year of Russia in Italy. If we look at the problems which currently exist between countries, such as the US, Italy, or Russia, this practice is of great value. Apparently, we cannot receive absolutely correct information from magazines, newspapers, or television, so we need to see ourselves. When we come to Russia as observers, our mission has two important aspects. First of all, we need to have the deepest respect to this great event in Russia. The second thing is we do not interfere. We just watch how the rules which Russia has on elections are observed. I want to say that you've made a big step forward. Transparency of elections, if I can use this expression, is very high and exceeds the level of the majority of European countries, which I visited as an observer. Have you discovered any violations? No. Do you think this election campaign is transparent? Yes. Have you personally made sure that the elections you have been observing were transparent and legitimate? How will you comment on this in your country? The entire process today was good and worthy. In this respect, the elections in Russia are comparable with the elections in Great Britain or any other Western countries, plus the webcams, which make all the process much better. Perhaps other countries would like to use this experience, of course, if they'll be able to afford this. Have you been observing the elections in Russia for the first time? This is my first experience as an international observer in Moscow, in Russia. Is there a big difference between your literature, cinema, TV, media-based vision of Russia and your personal impression? Definitely. Russia has changed. I have been in the Soviet Union, in the city that was called Leningrad, 35 years ago. Today, Moscow is a completely different city, modern city, world level, rapidly changing city. Have you discovered shortcomings? I have the experience of working as an election commission member in our London municipality, so I can tell you that those people here who worked at the voting stations have demonstrated a high level of professionalism. Comparing our parliament elections and local municipality elections in Great Britain with your elections, I can tell you that British are always a little bit skeptical with regard to any technical innovations, which are alleged to be highly efficient. We are used to doubting whether the effect is as large as expected. For the time being, what we see in Russia is that this system of webcams is operating quite well. Let's see what the final and real results of its operations will be upon completion of the elections and counting votes. But I think that other countries, if they can afford this, should use this experience and to deploy similar systems. The experts are not only ready to share their experience with us, but also to learn from us. We have a lot to share. The video monitoring and webcasting system, which covers the entire electoral process used at the last presidential elections, impressed our guests. Of course, there are traditional organizations performing monitoring functions, PACE, OSCE, and others, but missions of foreign public observers do not copy their functions. Integrity of control over elections, when everyone knows his place and role, when the process is well organized, promote better realization of the constitutional right of citizens to elect and be elected in state and local bodies.